This is a topic that I'm really interested in discussing because I think it's not something that's really in the mainstream, and I think definitely not something that had been discussed even a few years ago. I think the NBA really put it on the map when they started talking about the star athletes doing load management. So I'm happy to bring to you a module on load management and recovery. This first lesson, we're going to talk about just general concepts of load, and then we'll get into different management strategies. I do think it's important for young athletes because nowadays there's tournaments every weekend. There are ample places for you to play sports year round. And I think if we don't quantify how much athletes are doing, then we lose sight of how likely they are to get injured. So the first question I want to go over is, what do we mean by load? So basically, load is the amount of physical or mental work that an athlete performs during competition, training, during conditioning. So these are some examples of what the load might be in a specific sport. So for example, the sport may be baseball, where the athlete's load is how much pitch is thrown. But that's a physical load, right? There's also a mental load where if there's a lot of performance pressure. So if you're going through the playoffs, the load mentally may be higher than if you're in exhibition games, even though the physical load is the same. In basketball, minutes per game, mentally it might be the team culture. If there's yelling or abusive type behaviors, running will be miles per week. There may be some coaching dynamics that are impacting a runner. And then hours per week is kind of the typically way it's reported in gymnastics. And the mental load might be aesthetics. So there may be somebody in this person's sphere or team who's kind of worried about their weight or something like that. So both physical and mental can create a load, and that's basically the work or stress on the body. So how does load affect performance is the next logical question that we want to look at. So we really need to talk about something called functional overreaching. So basically what happens is your body undergoes a load, let's call it a workout or a competition, and right after that you do have a short-term time frame where your performance is going to decrease a little bit. Like that happens to everyone. You work out, you're tired, you're fatigued. Everyone's going to have a little decrement due to the training or due to the competition. But we need that stimulus. We need that push to the point where we feel fatigued in order to get performance enhancement over time. So the problem is if we take that load, but we don't give the body enough time to recover, what will happen is we'll get dysfunctional performance, right? So we call that under recovery or non-functional overreaching. So you didn't elicit the proper response that you wanted from the body by taxing it, by pushing it to the limit. But if we can manage load, if we can manage fatigue and recovery, we can optimize performance. And some of that starts with just being able to track it and know what we're dealing with. So this is a chart that kind of depicts what I just explained in words. So what you'll see is this is the body's capacity to perform, and right here is your base level, and this is over time. So what happens is, whatever it is, a training session, a competition, you get this load, and at that load, you're going to get some reduced capacity to do work, right? So let's just call it a swimming meet, right? You have a full day swim meet, that's your load, and then your capacity is reduced because you're tired, you're fatigued. Then we incorporate recovery, so in this case, good sleep, and your body recovers, and then it actually becomes stronger from that episode of functional overreaching. So if it's a swimming practice or a week's worth of swimming practice, you're fatigued afterwards, you recover, but then the body is stronger when it comes out of it. On the other hand, then you're going to start a new load after that recovery, and then you can see that the body again is going to dip in its ability to perform, which is a normal compensation during this load. And then as you go into a greater recovery, so either supplementation, carbohydrates, good diet, sleeping, the capacity to do work goes back up again. And so this is how load and recovery can be timed properly to increase your ability to perform well. The problem is if you continue to load when you haven't had proper recovery, the body's ability to perform goes less and less and less. And that's where load management comes into play. How do we make sure we're getting increased capacity per performance rather than decreased capacity per performance? But if we don't measure, if we don't look at that, then we won't know where our athletes are peaking or where they are dropping off. So how do we measure load? It can be done in a variety of ways. So load can be measured internally to the athlete or external. So internal would be like what the body is experiencing. So what is their rate of perceived exertion? On a scale of 1 to 10, how hard did the body perceive that particular workout is a good way to measure load. What their heart rate did. And then if you can get more sophisticated, what their blood levels of certain byproducts like lactate show. Now an external load is just a measure of from the outside environment. So GPS tracking is something that's kind of newer, not necessarily in the younger population, but definitely on the professional level. So just determining how much distance a certain athlete has gone is a good external load measurement. There are some neuromuscular technologies that can be attached to the patient. And then just an activity diary, like reporting what it is that they did, can be just an easy way to monitor load that's external to the athlete. So diving into a couple of those things that I think can be useful for young athletes. So heart rate, it just shows how much the body's consuming oxygen, and you can use a simple heart rate monitor to measure the intensity of exercise and usually report it as a percentage of your maximal heart rate. But the heart rate monitors are usually pretty sophisticated to determine that. So heart rate and how high your heart rate got and how long it stayed at that height is a good way to measure how much load a certain workout provided. And that can be tracked over time. Rate of perceived exertion, that's one I want to focus on because it can be very cost effective and it can be personalized to each individual. So that's just where an athlete says, hey, based on this particular workout, my body experienced this much exertion. This is how hard I thought the workout or the training session was. And then we can use that to then estimate what the load level was for that particular workout. And then a training diary, just simply tracking what they're doing so that you can follow over time and you can say, oh yeah, we are doing a little bit too much, or the intensity is starting to peak, but we're not peaking at the right time. And so I think that's really important to be aware of, or timing your peak in intensity well beyond when you need to get ready for the preseason. So this is the one that I found in the literature, and I'll list the source in the notes for this particular lesson. But this is a way in which I think we can easily look at load for our athletes very quickly and without a lot of resources. So basically, it's called session rate of perceived exertion. And basically what we want to do is ask the athlete what their average rate of perceived exertion, so 1 all the way up until 10. So you can see, okay, the rate of perceived exertion, how hard you felt that you were working was a 7. And then we want to know how long that work was being done. And in this example, it's 90 minutes. So if you have an RPE of 7 for 90 minutes, that gives you 630 units of work. It's just an arbitrary number, but that's what we can compare over time to say, okay, on this day I did 630 units of work, whereas on a different day I did 800 units of work. And then you can kind of determine what's your cutoff on what days you feel like you need longer recovery. If you have a session rate of perceived exertion above a certain limit, I know I need an extra day of recovery. There's lots of different ways that you can play with the data you have, but if you don't have the data, then you need to make sure that you're understanding what type of load you're under. And once you can understand that, then you can manipulate your recovery. You can manipulate your training sessions in order to stay within an optimized spot. So that's general overview of load. We're going to dive into how we can manage it and do those alterations in the next lesson.